second. I will do a more detailed intro later in the slides. For now, I'll just say I'm Luba if we haven't met. My background is I studied computer science, undergrad and grad, and after being a hands-on engineer, after about 7 years, I became a Scrum Master. I absolutely loved that journey. And then I became an Agile coach. And then I had the opportunity to build a team of Scrum Masters and Agile coaches. I had no idea what I was doing, so I hired many people that knew a lot more than me. And so I learned from many amazing coaches over the years. And about 4 years ago now, I became a consultant in a small consulting firm, and I got a chance to see what agile transformations are in companies like Fidelity and Massachusetts Medical Society. And then that small company was actually bought by a larger consulting company called Apex. And so I got a chance to see more, Citizens Bank and Equifax, and I'm at Eversource right now as a full-time agile coach still. But at the same time, I have a lot of other hobbies and interests, and I'll talk about them later. But this topic itself, stress, as you know, when you're an agile coach, often you're a therapist, right? And whether people report to you or don't report to you, when they don't report to you even more, they come to you and they pull their hair out and they cry on your shoulder. And there's so many reasons and causes for people to stress out and lose sleep. This topic in general is just very close to me. And without throwing, medical surveys and data at you, we all know that stress in general influences us in many different ways, and it causes many different diseases, and not just heart attacks and not just strokes. I mean, just horrible things. When I did a dry run of this presentation a couple of times, people were like throwing out other things that happened to either them or their loved ones, like shingles and eczema, like you name it, and even cancer. And so in general, this topic is very close to my heart, and that's why I want to talk about it. But the focus is on corporate America and more specifically on agile transformations and digital transformations. And I will also explain the reason why that particular focus and what makes me credible to actually talk about it. So let's see, share screen. All right, how's that for everyone?
Yes, we can see, thank you.
Okay, so let's talk about chill in the context of just kind of like relax, chill when you see someone very frustrated. It's my go-to line. I did get in trouble once because I told someone to just please chill when they're very frustrated. I'm not proud of that moment. But I also share about the lesson learned from that moment and self-reflection and how I could have handled, that particular situation a little bit better. So let's just dive in. Now, I assume that you are here because you're interested in this topic, but I just want to make sure. If you don't want to talk about stress, feel free to prioritize your time differently, and I will not take it personally. So the question for you, when was the last time you experienced stress at work? Now, you don't have to share it in the chat. Just think about it. When was it? And just think about what it was. Just think about what caused it. Again, don't share it just yet. Now, I don't know about you, but when I kind of self-reflected on this topic, I realized that my most creative moments, whatever that is when I'm in the most calm peace of mind, when I snowshoe up the hill, when I ski and the conditions are beautiful, when I go for a walk, right? And if I'm stressed out about anything, you are not going to get anything creative out of me. And so then I started looking into it, the science behind it, and I interviewed many people who are very much into science and neuroscience and use very fancy words that I'm not going to even attempt to pretend that I can repeat. But there's a lot of facts behind why innovation, you can innovate when you are in a certain state of mind. And that is not when you're stressed out. So, we lose the brain cycles when we stress out about something, and we don't want that. So, hence again, why this topic is dear to my heart, because I absolutely love innovation and I love creating things. Um, so, also question for you, like if you think about your stressful moment, think about the root cause. Like, what are some of the common root causes for those stressful moments, in your opinion? Is there something that just comes to your mind immediately? And you can put that in the chat. What are the potential root causes behind us being stressed out? And I am watching chat myself. I just opened it up. Too much going on. Okay. So maybe lack of priorities, disagreement. Yep. Having a bully for a manager. I hate when that happens. Conflicts, misunderstanding, living with ADHD and trying to stay organized. Oh, that's a good one. Tools that don't work. Incidents. I assume like production going down, right? That kind of stuff. That's stressful. Disconnection between goals and culture. Okay. This is a very, very common one, especially with digital transformations, right? We want to do this. We really want to do this, but no, you can't experiment and you can't do that and you can't do that. Unclear how much I can rock the boat and still stay in the organization, have a job. Absolutely. Unhealthy, unhappy organization, people that cannot communicate. Those are really good one. We can save this chat, right? Because there's a hypothesis that I have as far as like high level categories, and I came up with 7, and I'll tell you how I came up with those 7. And many of them actually go under them. But if there's a new one that maybe I'm missing, I will add it to the list. So the learning objective for this is to learn 7 common root causes of stress, learn how stress affects employee retention, innovation, and satisfied customers. In general, I don't know how much we need to really learn about it, because again, when you're stressed out, you want to walk, you want to work somewhere else when you're not stressed out. When there's misalignment, when there's executives not aligned on the goals, when the goals are not aligned with the culture, all of this, right, makes you want to go and look for something else somewhere else. And of course, when you're stressed, there's lack of innovation, and all of it, of course, we talk about, net promoter score and satisfied customers, right? If employees keep changing and you have new people, right, learning new things, and you're not innovating, how satisfied can your customers be? So all of it is related. And of course, you learn what can be done to reduce stress. So help me prove that hypothesis, please. So think of that stressful moment that you thought at the very, very beginning. And if whoever is looking at the chat, if you could repost my link. If you have a phone and this is easier this way, then scan this code and share which of the following categories does your stressful moment fall under. And if it is other, you can say something else if you don't see it listed. If you do say something else, I would absolutely love for you to actually speak up later, or we'll have a moment to pause, because I want to peel that onion and see if it's truly something else, or if it actually does fall under the 7. And when we talk about not believing something is feasible, there's a topic that I'm going to talk about, and it's about limiting beliefs. And it's limiting beliefs in the context of our roles, what we can do in our role, but it's also in the context of the organization. Because often we say, oh, this can be done. This was done, this has been done like this for, 30 years. We can't change that. Or it's a 200-year company, right? This is just how it is, right? And sometimes there are real reasons, but sometimes they are kind of excuses to keep status quo, right? So people wouldn't even entertain certain things. Oh, it's a compliance issue. And sometimes it's like, well, is it? Is it really compliance, or is it the environment, or is it the lack of willingness, right, to experiment and lean in and learn? Resistance to change on any or all level of the organization is winning so far. When I did a dry run yesterday with about 20 people, it actually kind of kept changing, but the limiting belief and I believe the conflict one was kind of going side by side. So conflict among peers is number 2, resistance to change. And then limiting belief one went to number 3. I'll give it a couple more minutes. I don't know how many people we have here. But until it stops moving, we'll give it a couple of.
There's 49 participants on the call, and look, if I'm reading this correctly, you had 42 votes.
Okay. Cool. 20 might have been left over from the dry run yesterday. I did not reset the survey. I wanted to kind of see the more combined, because the folks that joined yesterday were also Agile coaches. And so I figured it'd be more interesting to actually keep it together. And I haven't figured it out yet. I didn't want to mess with it with Slido or Slido. I don't know how you say it correctly. You can have multiple surveys and then you can merge them. So my goal is to, whenever I present this at some point, it'd be interesting to see, like, out of 500 people, right, or out of 1,000 people, like, these are the results. So keeping it going for as long as I can, just to see if I can prove this, if I can truly prove this hypothesis. Okay, so it looks like resistance to change on any level of the organization. Oh, still moving. Okay. Are there any surprises? So if you look at this, you can say it in the chat, or you can go off mute, right? It's a very casual conversation here. So are you shocked with this results? Would you have expected that something else would be higher on the list as the cause of stress?
So, interpersonal conflict.
You're breaking up, Maggie.
I think she said interpersonal conflict.
Okay.
That's what she thought might have been higher. I think that's what I heard.
So to me personally, I have to be honest with you, like, misalignment among executives, I thought would be higher.
I mean, that's been the cause of my stress. The executives want something to happen, and the folks you're working with aren't necessarily on that page of the playbook. And that's definite stress. You go into one meeting with one set of audiences and you hear mandates and this, that, and the other thing, and you go to work with the other folks and they don't want to do anything. You know?
Yeah, my most frustrating moment was when there were a total of 9 VPs. Not all of them were VPs of engineering, but the majority were the VPs of engineering. And so when the goals were not aligned, and there were some moments, like, you could see that there is some personal agenda because they signed up for, like, different things. But the people that are doing the job are the people that are doing the job. And so when you talk about, like, stealing people for your own agenda, it's like, okay, let's break this team apart because I need this person and that person. So there was this misalignment of among people that are very, very high up. And so the people that are stressed out the most, of course, are the people who are doing the work.
I think misalignment among executives is also hard to detect sometimes if you're an individual contributor. Sometimes you don't, it feels like, oh, the company's going toward A. Oh, no, we're going toward C. Oh, no, we're going toward B. And that's what the perception is. And that may actually be a misalignment, but you don't, because at the bigger companies, you don't really know what the executives think.
Yeah, that's true. I was in the position where I did not have access, and in many cases, actually, I don't. Like, when I was at Citizens, I was kind of really on a team level, right? Maybe a few directors here and there. There were many layers between me and the high level executives. But in some cases, I've been in the room with C-level executives and VPs. And so I got a chance to see kind of both angles where like you don't know what's happening at all. Like, what are the organizational goals actually? Like, what are we going towards? And how can we measure if we're actually like achieving it? And there's like this disconnect. But it's a common one. Yeah. Even if you don't see it, it's a common one.
I actually have been reading about that. And when the leadership's not all on the same page and agreeing, it creates like departmental silos. So if departments aren't working together towards a common goal across the company, that's a really big flag that leadership's not on the same page.
Yeah.
And that happens very often. I'm in a huge company, and I've worked in different departments, and I feel like they all have different rules, even though it's the same company. And it's like, well, you need to stay in your lane and not go outside your lane to, you know, but I'm thinking, well, I'm trying to go above and beyond, because why is this a different rule when the contract for these providers are the same? So I think, yeah, I agree with that very, very much.
The challenge also that I have seen is, so for example, if you're hired as an agile coach from the start and you are told, suggested, highly recommended to just work with teams, but say you've been an enterprise coach and say you've worked with C-level executives, and then say you've run, you know, leadership training and you've run workshops to get them leaders to align, it's very hard, right? Like, so you see this gap, but they don't want your help. They want to have nothing to do with your expertise.
Right.
And so what do, right? Those moments, again, I've experienced stress in those moments because, not because, it's because other people come to you, right? Like pulling their hair out and crying. And it's like, you want to help because you know you can, but you really can't. So now you have to do this dance and be very creative. And in some point, I had to actually partner up with HR, because even though I could have done that particular training, like the leadership would have not seen me as an expert or someone credible, because they just wouldn't. And so HR hired McKinsey to do exactly the same thing that we had discussed that could help, right? And they paid millions to tell them exactly what I would have told them, and a couple of other coaches and collectively. But there are ways to kind of go around certain things. You really have to know, sometimes you do have to stay in your lane, sadly, right? But you have to make peace with it, that there's nothing more you can do except find people that maybe those people find credible, right? Like, again, see if you can work with someone else.
Yeah.
So conflict among peers and leadership and resistance to change are the winners here. All right, so we'll put that aside for a little bit. There are a lot of really awesome comments here. Dying for a paycheck. Okay, that's cool. Let's all make a note of it. I always look for new books. But let's not do that, okay? Let's not die for a paycheck. Let's find some solutions here today. Okay, so the hypothesis is the root cause of any stress in the corporate world falls under at least one of the following. Not believing something is feasible. Like I said, it's all about limiting beliefs. What can be done? What can we do? What can we do as coaches? Are we completely, are we staying in our lane and there's absolutely no opportunity for us to do anything else? Do we have enough skills and capability to actually do something, right? Like often without ourselves. And then in the context of digital transformations, like what can truly be done? Like, can we do this or can we not do this? And I see it all the time where in some cases, I actually don't know enough. For example, right now in my full-time role, there's this huge SAP implementation. And when there is a vendor that is an expert in that particular scenario, and they want to do it in a certain way, and they say, well, we're not going to estimate, say, in story points, because we already know it's a set of same workflows, and we already know how many hours something takes. So we're just going to estimate and forecast this way. And there's absolutely nothing I can say because I don't know. I've never done an SAP implementation. So who am I, right, to challenge you? And so in some case, I don't know, is it truly not feasible? Is it truly doesn't make sense? Or it's an excuse, which I know excuse is not like the best word, but it's a safe space, right? So you're not going to judge if I say something wrong. So conflict among peers and leadership. And again, like, where does the conflict come from? It often comes from priorities, lack of priorities, right? Lack of organizational goals, lack of alignment, misalignment among executives, resistance to change. When we talk about data-driven decision-making, that also often causes a conflict, right? Because you want someone to make a decision, but they can't for different reasons. We're all different. So I talk a lot about social styles and how some are drivers and they only care about delivery, but some absolutely care about people more. And so they always love consensus. Some more analytical folks have a hard time making a decision because they're afraid to be wrong. And so there's so many different aspects of why this is an issue and the root cause of a potentially stressful moment. Lack of accountability on all levels of an organization, even with the decision making. If someone knows they're accountable, say, to approve something, because that's the kind of environment, but they're not approving it because they knew Friday was a deadline, they didn't do it on Thursday or Wednesday, and then Friday they're off, and that's the last day of the sprint, and then all of a sudden everyone is panicking because they just kind of shrugged their shoulders, didn't tell anyone that they're off. So those moments happen like all the time. And so it's the lack of accountability. And the interesting part is it could be on the level of, the team. Someone didn't test something or didn't develop, didn't, finish their user story. Actually, more often than not, it's not on the level of teams. Not understanding value. I talked about it, like your personal, also the solutions being delivered. Sometimes we just don't see the point, right? Like we see that this project or whatever that is, it's like, why are we even doing it? Like, what value is it bringing? And then you don't kind of feel satisfied with the work because you kind of feel like, you're wasting your time because the thing you're working on, you see no potential, you see no value for the clients. And so that potentially can really cause you to not enjoy your day-to-day. So I promised the introduction, but I actually think I covered the introduction enough. So I'll skip that. The only thing I'm going to say, so I kind of gave you the overview of me being a consultant and an agile coach for now quite a few years. And someone gave me feedback yesterday that this logo is confusing. So in addition to a full-time job, I decided to do something else. And so I started my own company because I absolutely love to mentor and I love to inspire folks. And I decided to focus on facilitation, public speaking, but also primarily mentorship of women in tech. And the reason I decided to do that, because if we talk about stress in general, everyone has stressful moments and everyone has doubts and lack of confidence. But in general, over the years, I noticed that women have it more. We have more doubts. We have lack of confidence. We do stress out about things more. Again, I'm not going to throw like statistics at you. But I also worked as a ski instructor for 17 years. And it was absolutely amazing to me how women would come in to take ski lessons. And I would say, what would you like to learn today? And they would say, well, I'm horrible at a black diamond, which is the most difficult trail, or double diamond. It's one of the steepest one. and my technique is horrible, and I don't look good, and I don't feel good. And then I would take them up, and on so many occasions, I would look at them and I'd be like, oh my God, you're skiing better than me. Like, what are you talking about? Like, it's beautiful, right? But it's that lack of confidence. And when the guys would come take lessons, they'd be like, oh, I am good, take me up. And I would like take them up, and on the way there, I'm like, are you sure? Perhaps we shouldn't really go there just yet. And so in general, I decided that I want to mentor and make sure that I help women in tech become more confident and just discover potential and opportunities to have an amazing life. So this particular 7 topics that we talked about, at some point, I decided to get out of my comfort zone and write a book. And I did it with 8 contributing authors, all women in tech. Most of them are agile coaches. We had a VP of operations, we had a director of innovation and product. And so collectively there was, I calculated the other day, kind of our ages and the average years in the workforce, over 200 years of experience collectively went into this. And the way we did it is, now, when we share stories, and it's all about lessons learned. It's all about lessons learned within digital transformations. The phenomenal thing is that the things that we remember the most, whether they're from our childhood or from our work from over a decade ago, it's the moments that we had a very strong emotional connection with. Now, it can be positive, it can be negative, but it had to somehow touch our soul. And the thing that we learned is, because the book is about lessons learned, the stories we remembered were the one that caused us a lot of very stressful moments. And so the way we did it is we started sharing stories, and then we said, okay, well, which category does it go under? And whatever stories we collectively shared ended up going under 6 major categories. And then at the end, we realized that the limiting belief has to be added. So there is a reason why limiting belief kind of stands out. It turned out to be the absolutely longest chapter of the book with so many different examples, but it was the one that we added last, because we like kept coming around to the fact that all of it is truly like, it was just the limiting belief, either in the context of what we thought we could accomplish, or in the context of what the companies and the leaders in the companies within the context of transformations could accomplish. And the interesting part that we also noticed is stress is an amazing thing. It can happen even if you're working on something super fun, super creative with the people that you love, right? All these women were the people that I at some point worked with, and in some cases still work with now. So there were no strangers. It was everyone that I got along with over the years, but so many stressful moments. And the stressful moments came from the wrong expectations, assumptions made, me not clarifying something, the process, different working styles, even accountability during us writing about the chapter on accountability, right? It's like, because I didn't communicate something, for example, I didn't communicate the importance of a certain deadline, so someone didn't turn in something else. And so it was interesting that we kept coming back, and we did the retrospective to, if we were to do it again, how would we do it differently? And just like we would do in our agile transformations world. And it was kind of like the same thing. Most of the stressful moments could have been prevented. That's basically to summarize it. Okay, so I'll put that on hold. Everything could have been prevented. And we'll talk about how, and we'll talk about what chill means in general, and how I came up with that particular acronym. There's a fun story behind that as well. So fail. What is fail? Now, we could have done how to succeed in digital transformations, or we could have done how to fail in digital transformations, because we all have experienced failure plenty of time, right? There was plenty of content for that. But we chose to really focus on lessons learned, good or bad lessons learned, because it's all about continuous learning. So we thought maybe that's what would be the most beneficial to readers. So it's really, we focused on the mindset. You know, when we replace the fear of failing with the excitement of learning, we can succeed in many things in life. And so it's not fail, it's fail, it's facing yet another important lesson, and we don't stop, right? So we continuously learn. So what is chill, and how does it help reduce stress? So we can look at chill in many different ways, but we can clarify and we can communicate. A lot of our stress comes from either we're confused. For example, a couple of stories were shared when I did the dry run, and it was a common one that I've seen is the lack of understanding who's supposed to be doing what, right? So like an agile transformation is kicked off, and then you, and you, starting tomorrow, you're a product owner. And they go, what am I supposed to do again? Right, so that's a cause for a stressful moment. Or someone is doing something that is supposed to be done by someone else, and then that someone else says, why are you doing my job? Right, so clarification, communication, honor your commitment. If you made the promise, just keep it. And then just have respect for others, because often we have stressful moments because either we're not respected, or maybe we don't respect someone else because we don't lean in, for example, and maybe learn. Maybe they do have certain expertise in the background, and maybe they know something you don't, right? But sometimes we question, and so that also causes stress. Identifying the specific gaps in skills, because some people do say that they're extremely stressed out because they don't know something. They know they're supposed to know it, but they don't. And so if it's a legit gap in skills, that can also cause stress. Metrics to use. Again, you have a vision, you broke it down into goals. What are the KPIs? What are we measuring? How do we know if we're even doing well or not well? So identifying things, right? Identifying and communicating goes a long way. Leverage skills and expertise of others, like that's huge. But even in the context of resistance to change, which was number 2 as the root cause of stressful moments, we talk a lot about leveraging resistance. How do you take people who kind of sit with their hands crossed like this, you know, and kind of go, this doesn't make sense in our environment. Like that makes no sense, right? My most favorite was, it was an infrastructure team. And they're like, Agile doesn't work for us. And it was really like just hands like this, and like I was the worst enemy because I was talking, it was Agile 101. It was very like straightforward beginners training. But when we started talking about what exactly doesn't work, it turned out that it doesn't work wasn't really, it was too general. When we started peeling the onion and identifying and clarifying what exactly that particular person didn't think worked, it was all great, and he became our biggest champion. So leveraging those folks helps you in change management. And then lean in and learn, assume you don't know, and be open to learning. We do often, like when we get to a certain level of expertise, right? Like we say, no, but story points is the best way to estimate. And so just kind of, you know, being open-minded and just being open to other folks' expertise. Okay, so we're gonna do a very quick exercise before we dive into very specific workshops. So there's 7 workshops that we put together with those women that we co-authored the book. And I created a slide for each of those workshops with very detailed and specific open-ended questions that you can ask. It could be used as a self-reflection moment or an actual workshop that you can run. So for the people here that they love talking about the mindset, but they want to kind of feel and see something tangible that they can use tomorrow, it's coming. But before we get there, let's do this. And I think it'd be more interesting if you just went off mute. Whoever wants to maybe raise your hand so we don't all talk at the same time, and whoever is monitoring can help out. Just share whatever that moment was that you shared previously, and we can maybe talk about how it could have been prevented, that stressful moment. Does that sound like a good exercise? Do we have a brave soul? Did I mention that the people who like engage get a free book as a present mailed out tomorrow?
But Kai raised his hand.
Okay. Go ahead, Kai.
I actually recently left a job where even though when I'd been an employee for about 2 shifts, the boss wouldn't stop talking about how much he hated his job. Like the whole time. Like every time I interacted with him, he found a way to circle back to, I hate my job, I hate my work. And as a new employee, it's like, you're trying to convince me to stay? This is very concerning.
So that's interesting. So, all right. So in the chat, or whoever wants to go off mute, how could that have been handled? And I'll share my opinion later, but I want to hear from others.
I mean, I guess it's hard if you're new, but I might say just be honest and say, it really makes me uncomfortable when you keep saying these things in the meeting. I'm brand new to the org, and I'm not sure if I'd want to stay if this is the atmosphere that's being created. But that's probably really hard if you just started at a new job. So you might also engage maybe somebody else in the org to talk to confide in. I know that's really hard to be new and have to deal with that guy.
But you left, right? So like if you walked, it's almost like having that conversation, you think, what's the worst that can happen? If I have that honest conversation and they let me go, well, I'm gonna walk anyway, right? So I don't know, what do you have to lose? All right, who else?
The only problem.
I learned very early in my career, I don't know, I was in a meeting, I don't know, half a dozen people, and I started complaining about something. And somebody far more senior looked at me and said, "You've got one choice." Basically leave. And in your situation there, Kai, I kind of would have said to him, "Why don't you leave? If you're that miserable, why don't you leave?"
So Maggie, you said you're not sure about the clarify. So in this example, and because like I know how I operate, I would actually want to clarify with that person what exactly makes him so unhappy, or her. I missed the.
You're a good leader. Whoever said that's probably the worst leader there possibly could be.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it's unacceptable for a manager. Even if you do think that, it's absolutely unacceptable behavior.
Yeah. But I also think that, Kai, think about it this way. I would also pay attention, did that person only complain to you, or they in general complained to everybody else, right? Or they had so much respect for you, I don't know, that they trusted you, that they can like pour their soul and heart out.
Looks like both Davids have their hand up. So David Hyman first, and then David Rosenberg has his hand up. So go ahead, David, number 1.
Okay. Well, in terms of, the boss criticizing you as a new person, not quite keeping their word, because if they hired you, there was an implication that they gave their word that they regard you as an asset to the organization. Otherwise, they wouldn't have hired you. And now they're going back on it if they keep digging into you and not letting you go there. So it's a bit of not honoring, the promise that they implicitly said when they hired you in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thought. I think there was a miscommunication in there. He was actually complaining about his own job.
Hmm.
Like I was a brand new hire, and he was telling me how awful the work was, how awful the company was, how awful the customers were.
Mhm.
They must have been just in a very bad place, right?
Yeah.
Just-
And he tells you this after he interviewed you and hired you, not while he was interviewing.
Yes. Yes. after.
Unacceptable.
Uh-huh.
So hopefully you're in a better place now, right? We can
I'm gonna find one, that's for sure.
complain, horrify, incriminate, lie, leave. That's very clever.
Hey, I did this. I did this over the summer. I up and quit on a very excellent company because things changed, and I analyzed it, and I didn't like what was going on. I'm back looking for something now. The market's very good, so I'll take 6 months off.
So
Sometimes
funny
you
you
got to
should
do it.
say that. I'm not going to jump ahead, but the very, very last slide that I have after all the workshops, it's actually about, listen, we don't have magic wands. There's only so much you can do. You can try this and you can try that, and you can invite people, to change, and you can do, but at the end of the day, you should feel okay actually walking away. You should feel okay actually walking away. Now I guess I can add poet to my resume. That rhymed.
What a feeling of relief when I made the decision to do that. My blood pressure went down. I was starting to have health problems, and then over the course of a month or so, it all fixed itself.
And talk about limiting beliefs. I've been in a situation a long time ago, 17 years ago, and I remember because my older daughter is 17 and I gave birth to her 17 years ago. And I went back to work, and my boss told me that I should just stay home and raise my baby. And he was just the most horrible boss I've ever had in my life. And he made my life miserable. And for whatever reason, now I don't understand what possessed me to stay for 2 years, because I was under the assumption, it was my limiting belief that I just could not leave. Like that I had to stay. I had to just work through it. And now I realize that no, you don't.
Yeah. I read this line somewhere. I don't remember where I read this, but it struck me really well that if you are unhappy at your place where you are working, move. You are not a tree.
I like that. All right, David Rosenberg. I think you're still on mute. Dave?
He's unmuted. I don't know if he walked away for a little bit.
Let's go to Leanne, and then we'll go back to Dave.
I just relate a lot with, I'm in the same company in a different department. And it's funny because the department I'm in now knows about the department I was in, and in the department, they were trying to fix it. And I had to call human resources, which I didn't do for 20 years in this company. And it was at that point where health problems, going home crying every day, never feeling good enough, never getting, you did a great job. It was always what you did wrong. It was never what you did right. I was actually told this isn't the right fit for you, even though I was, producing one of the biggest producers and finding most of the errors. And so it was really hard. And again, like yourself, I felt I was a single mother. I felt like I had no way out. At the time I was in a toxic relationship. So I'd come home and that was my mental state. So I stayed for 5 years, and there's even people in the company that say like, you were in jail for like 5 years. I don't know how you went through that. And I've heard it's gotten better. But you know, it was just a really, really difficult department to be in. And you feel like, especially being older, I guess, and not realizing, I feel like the younger people now have more like, feel like they can speak up more. And I feel like being older, because we're from the old school, it's like, no, you just do what you're told and you shut your mouth.
100%. Because I coach many women right now, and I am in awe, and I'm so amazed where I would talk to a young mother, right? She's like 25, she has a 1-year-old, and she's like, I want to start my own business, and I want to do this, and I want to do that. And I'm like, oh my God, you're like amazing. Like when I had a 1-year-old, and I like, forget it. Like you get up and you go to work and you come back and you go, like, there was no like brain cycles to like be passionate about starting a business, and like very different, very. And but the confidence, it is a little bit higher, definitely with younger generation, but it's still not there.
Well, and then they deplete that confidence in that department. My confidence got depleted, you know, so it's like, being in that department and being in a toxic relationship, you get, you know, then it's like, and then once you don't have that confidence, it's like you're useless, really. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, that's how I feel anyway, because confidence is huge to, like, you know, even if you're faking it until you make it, it's one of the biggest things.
There's only so much you can do, you know, until it backfires, right? So when I talk about health, we're talking about, but then it backfires. And then a lot of it is not recoverable. Like some of it is like, you can say, okay, well, now I quit and now I feel better. But there are certain things that happen to our bodies in general that, you know, you don't go back. Because it's, and the reason, okay, I'll talk about chill a little bit later, but the reason why I actually care about this topic, like really with my old passion, is my dad had his first stroke at the age of 47. So for 25 years, he was extremely sick with 4 strokes. And when he went to a doctor and the doctor said, you know, do you want to live? And he goes, yeah, I got kids, grandkids, not grandkids at that time, but, and the doctor said, you know, raise your right hand, like drop it and just say F it all. Because if you're going to continue to stress out, you're not going to live. And so I've seen, and you know, it became a joke if we started talking about something and it was like politics or anything that we didn't agree on, we would just raise the right hand and just drop it and just say, you know what, F it all. But I brought it into work and I felt like I couldn't swear all the time. So kind of changed it to chill, but the gesture stayed. And it was because I've seen, you know, friends going through cancer, and yes, they don't say for sure that it was caused by stress, but it was kind of like a coincidence way too many times that disease came up after, you know, either losing a parent or something horrible happening with business or something like that. So I'm just a believer that, like, it's just not worth it at the end of the day.
That's the point you get to. Yeah.
It's just not worth it. Okay. And the funny thing, so there's a note from David. The funny thing is that all those people who are inflicting the stress likely think they're doing a good thing. That's so another thing, right? So if you think about the actions, so there's only so much we can do. We either can have a mindset, well, you know what? It's a learning opportunity. Like I used to say that. If I'm working with someone who's an asshole, oh, it's going to make me stronger. I'm going to learn.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's what they're trying to, it's almost like a military where they're going to beat you down so you're tough enough to deal with it all.
And
Yep.
you know what? And maybe you become tougher, but it's also like maybe in some case, it became clear to me that if they're not aware, if they think it's a good thing, who is going to give them feedback? So it's either it's up to you to actually give them feedback, and there's an art in how you do it, right? You can't just say you're an ass, don't do that, right? Like you have to do it in a way that is going to be consumable by them. Or if you're not in the position or don't feel comfortable or don't have enough skills to deliver that feedback, then you do partner with someone from HR or somebody, but someone, maybe like 360, right? Like suggest so that, you know, they get review from their people anonymously. Somehow you have to get through, because if they don't know that it's a problem, how is it ever going to be fixed?
Can I share something with you really quick? I'm sorry. This is one of the ways I handled it, and I've done it a little bit differently before I actually called HR, is I called him, my manager, we were not allowed to speak on the floor. Produced, nobody speak. And it was, one time I was actually told, a lot of people would be told, take it off the floor, this is disruptive. So my manager was talking next to my desk, next to my cubicle, whatever. And she was, it wasn't work related, and I normally wouldn't care. But because of the rules they're setting, if you're going to set the rules and you want me to follow them, you're going to follow them too. So I would say it very nicely, but it's, I'm sorry, but this is very disruptive. Can you please move? And she knew what I was doing. And she goes, thanks for keeping me honest, Leanne. But that's how I would handle it. Like, and
sometimes we're not aware. I know myself, right? Like I will be loud or this or that, and I'll tell my kids to be quiet, but then they have a lesson and there I go talking to my husband, like if he was in Alaska, yelling to him, right? And it's like, but it's not, sometimes it's just that it's a self-awareness. Good miss, there's a note from Roseanne. There's a lot of people who miss connecting the work stress and what is making them physically sick. Yeah, sometimes people don't know. They go from doctor to doctor.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'd like to throw a question out there. It seems to me that folks are really focusing on the negative in the last, maybe since just COVID or whatever, but and this is the reason I left, and other people are mentioning it, and other people that I know in the industry are talking about how they want to leave their jobs. It seems like there's a trend to focus feedback simply on the negative, rather than the old way of at least start with some positive and then get to the negative. But now it's just shotgun the negative, right? And hope it sticks, hope something sticks. But it just leaves you shell shocked, basically.
But it's training, right? I mean, whoever gives you just negative feedback, that's poor leadership skills, right?
Yep.
But unfortunately, often those folks are not willing. And if their boss is also the same way, and the boss's boss is the same way, it's challenging. But there are ways to help with that. So we're not talking just about problems here. I'm going to attempt to give you some solutions, maybe.
So my microphone is now working. And
okay. Hi, David.
Hi. So with respect to Kai's original question, I think what I would try to do is turn it into interviewing the boss. That is, ask him probing questions about what happened, why did it happen, what do you think the alternatives were, and I would be doing that for two reasons. One is to get as much information about the environment as possible to see if I could figure out some path for me that would work. But the other thing is that people often need to vent, and by giving him an opportunity to explain what his issues are and giving him the impression that people are actually listening to, or someone, I am actually listening to him, that actually might make him feel better and less negative. Then with respect to the last point that was made about negativity, in environments in which I've worked, there was a fixed pot of money that could be used for raises, and it had to be distributed to people. And in a situation where you had a lot of good people reporting to you, you'd like to give them all, maximum raises, but you couldn't because there wasn't enough money for that. And so basically managers had to find excuses for not giving what would be appropriate raises because they just didn't have enough money. And so there was negativity, I'd say artificial negativity, to justify the poor raises that were given out.
Which is
That's it.
horrible, right? Which is so horrible, because I would much rather for my boss to tell me, listen, we don't have the money, but you did an amazing job and I would absolutely love to give you the raise, but I just can't. I never put down people when they reported to me if I couldn't give them the raise. That's just so wrong on so many different levels.
I agree.
Linda.
So, Luba, I was just thinking too, it's hard enough, I think, when we we hear negative feedback, but I think as coaches or as scrum masters, whatever role we're in, as a coach or a scrum master role, I think it's just really sort of 3 times as hard when you're hearing a person talk about something that they've experienced, something, negative feedback that they've received. And you see, as a coach or a scrum master, you see how hard that individual is working. I think you mentioned earlier, you talked about I think it was new product owners that you mentioned, here you go, here's the job. You've had no training, but here's the job. Here's the coach. It's yours, and I think that's, really hard because a lot of the managers, they might never have served in a product owner role. So they're, providing feedback, critiquing, adding stress, and then us, as coaches and scrum masters, I know that adds stress to my day when I see, when I hear that someone I'm coaching is getting some negative feedback, and I know how hard they're trying.
So if you think about the chill, the way this chill is described, not the one that was put there about lying, and I saved that chat because that's brilliant, another alternative. So in that particular case, like as an agile coach, right? Yes, sometimes we feel like our hands are tied in some cases, but if you observe something like that, and if you look at this, okay, so you identified what the problem is. Maybe it's the manager is not skilled enough to actually give constructive criticism to the product owners, right? But as a coach, you could proactively, maybe, because sometimes managers, they need to put something in that HR system. Sometimes, like, I don't know, how much thought are they putting in? Like, are they reaching out to ask you for feedback if you work with that product owner? So maybe as a coach, what you could do is proactively, if you identify that that's a gap and you clarify the role of the product owner, right? And you encourage the manager to honor, I don't know, their role as a manager. Like, they need to respect the people that work for them and maybe encourage them to lean in and learn. There are ways, right? And again, partnering with HR and say, there's a gap and we need our managers to go through this particular training, what it means to manage product owners if they've never been product owners themselves. So we could do things proactively, right? Like, my whole point is that, like, yeah, we can stress out or we can take a particular action. And leaving is also a good action, but there are many things like before perhaps that could be salvaged. Is that the right word? A lot of awful citation, but yes, just be honest with me to show me the respect. Exactly. I had a manager at IBM who acknowledged the crappy raises we all got. I still respect his decision 30 years later. Exactly. Just be honest. And my favorite boss of all the years never gave me a raise and never promoted me. But she always told me how much she appreciates all the work that I do. And we're still friends. And I mean, we're talking about, you know, a couple of decades. So it's just, you know, be human. We do typically have a lot more choices, but we are under the assumption, and that's why we talk about limiting beliefs. I mean, when I shared stories about limiting beliefs, it was in so many different contexts. You know, starting with like college and my ability to actually take a physics course. I mean, we're talking about so many different things. We have doubts that we can actually do something else. All right, any more hands raised? Now I don't even know who gets the present. You guys are also engaging. It was my bribe to get someone to talk, but all right, maybe Kai. Kai was the first brave soul. We'll give it to Kai. Okay, so shall we move on? Do we need a break? Are we good to move on?
Move on.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so so after kind of sharing all the stories that, you know, with over 200 years of experience, and we had a lot of discussion too. So like we would share the story and we would kind of input our thoughts and ideas and our experience. You're welcome, Kyle. Just need your address. We kind of finished pretty much each chapter with collectively. So like, what's the main lesson that we want to get across here? And so I'm just kind of sharing some of them here just to kind of wrap it up. You know, I'm not going to go through all 7 chapters, but the most common limiting belief is to think that just because something has always worked this way, it has to stay this way. And in the context of limiting beliefs and our doubts, we could all leverage someone to talk to, right? Things that people see from outside looking in can be extremely helpful. So, and over the years, you know, sometimes I had mentors at work who I could leverage, and sometimes I didn't. But find someone to have that conversation, to really peel that onion apart and make sure that it is truly that you have no choice. It's not just your limiting belief, but having someone else, having that brainstorm session, having a mentor is extremely important. And then if you identify that, you know what, maybe it's really just not your limiting belief, maybe it's a true skill gap, then just lean in and learn, but just kind of take action. I guess that's the main point. A common cause for conflict is people not understanding their roles, right? This is where the clarify comes into the picture. People are confused about who's accountable for what. That's also very common. Some sample scenarios are, and we talked a lot about this because this was the most common topic among when we talked about accountability and our pain points, personal, from 9 of us. Managers still managing teams and applications versus empowering teams and product owners, right? Because middle management is in that position where they're not quite sure how to bring value, comes back to not knowing their value. And so they're sticking with what they know. And that's like, if I was talking to that particular manager, I would encourage them to kind of lean in and learn, you know, like there are other ways. But sometimes just clarifying it to them also is good enough. Okay, so how to attain chill, how to make sure that you have a less stressful environment and you're just living a life worth living, fulfilled life, no stress, no health issues. Focused workshops. And when I talk about focused workshops, the thought process was, okay, so we shared our stories, great, and we shared lessons learned, wonderful, and then we summarized it, great, so now what? So we wanted people to have something that they can use, something that when we thought about where we were, say, 10 years ago, Like if someone gave it to us, we would stress out less in our roles. And so collectively we were brainstorming what should it be. And now there's a lot of text here because when I did the dry run, someone said that they could benefit rather than just talking about them, giving actually something specific. So you don't have to read all of it. I will give like a high level overview. And what I'll do afterwards, I have 7 PDF files that I will upload here in Zoom, and you can save them, that have this suggestions for particular workshops to address particular pain points. So in the first chapter, it's all about limiting beliefs. And it's all about, of course, stress related to our doubts and not thinking that we can do something. Or within the digital transformation, it has to be done this way because it's always been done this way. So it could be used as a self-reflection, right? Like you can do it as an exercise by yourself. And again, it's a very popular question, right? Like if you had a magic wand and could grant any wish, what changes would you make in your organization? Or in the case of like personal growth, your career. And sometimes when you actually start writing it out, I always encourage folks to think about like the smallest possible action. Like, so like, don't tell me that there's no way you can accomplish something. Let's talk about, like, for example, in the context of this woman I was coaching, who really wants her business. She just doesn't know what to do. She just has this vision for the life she wants. And at the end where we left off, the smallest possible thing that she can do, which is not scary, like not even like picking the name for the business, not even like registering website, none of that. What's the least scary was for her to come up with 5 questions that she can answer, meaning she's an expert in certain things. So what are the 5 questions that she can answer? Because that is something that she can serve to people. And so like, what's the smallest thing? And when you start thinking about it, you know, there's a chance that with those small actions, rather than being all stressed out about the fact that you don't know what you want to do, you can actually get towards that vision that you have. And I'll share it too. So now this is also to be used for a self-reflection moment or a sample intake for a conflict resolution. So again, it does talk about, you can do it in many different ways. So the way I had done some of these workshops is you want people to open up, you want to give them some tools. Some conflict resolution is easier to resolve than other. So here we're not talking about like really serious things that HR has to be involved. But I'll give you an example. I had one scenario where an Agile coach called me. She was in a different state. She was very frustrated. And she said, listen, like, I can't forecast anything because none of my developers will give me an estimate. Like none of them. Like they're really like, they're torturing me. Like I walked out of the conference room with tears and I'm miserable. So it's not really like a personal conflict, but it's a conflict because now there's a conflict between this Agile coach and the team. And so I flew in and we did this exercise that I had learned in one of the leadership offsites, and it was about social styles. And when we did this exercise, the whole point of the social style exercise, and I'm happy to do it maybe in one of the sessions, is there are really like 4 categories of folks. You know, some people like to tell people what to do. Some people like to ask, right? Some people like consensus, but it takes them longer to make a decision. Some make a decision without looking at any data. So the analytical folks that love to look at the data, like they're very frustrated because those folks just made a decision without looking at anything. And then you have folks that are like very expressive, and they think on their feet and they can make a decision just fine without also analyzing things too much. And when you do the training and you recognize and you realize that we're wired so differently, and it causes conflicts, not just at work, in our personal lives as well. So when I flew in and we did this exercise, and then I said, okay, well, if you're very analytical, go to the far left corner of the conference room. If you're expressive, go to this corner. Well, so guess what? She was the only one, this Agile coach, was in the far corner of the expressives, and everyone else on the team were as analytical as they get. And so the reason that they couldn't give her the estimate, because they couldn't think on their feet like that. Like she expected her to just, she expected them to just look at the story very quickly and just immediately tell how many story points. And so the solution there was she was to give them the list of the stories that they had to estimate a day before, give them a chance to go to their corner, process it, think about it, and then there was no issues. So it's not that they didn't want to give them the estimates, it's just that's not how the process work. So there are a lot of different ways to resolve a conflict when you have, you can design a workshop around it. Yeah, Leanne.
Sorry, for some reason I can't type. It's not allowing me to type in the chat. So that's why I raised my hand. I took that at what my work actually had that exercise, and I'm expressive, by the way. But yeah, and then I'm fighting because I didn't want to be expressive. I wanted to be, it's not the
it's a misconception that one is better than the other. Yeah.
Right. And it's not the analytical one. It's the one where everyone loves you, like
amiable. Yeah.
Amiable, thank you.
Yeah.
But it's a great course. If anybody's never taking it, it is a great course, and it does give you a lot to think about and how to, like for me, it's like lower your volume, like know how to act depending on what type of social person you're around, and kind of like knowing like, are you this, are you that? So it was really educational, and I found it very useful. So anybody that I just wanted to give it a shout out because I have taken it.
And in some cases, it's also interesting when you start learning about this with your peers, and you start using the same language. So I am amiable, I'm like easygoing, right? Like all is good. But there was one coworker that I just like, there was so much, like he was causing me a lot of stress. And what he would do is he would like praise me in meetings, like very loudly. And I told him once that it kind of makes me very uncomfortable. And I grew up in former USSR. We very rarely got a pat on the back. And I just like, I don't need that. Like, I don't need to be praised. Yes, I'll say thank you if someone gives me a compliment, but I don't need that. But what he was doing was what he wanted, right? Because one of the aspects of very expressive people is they love the pat on the back and they love to be praised. And there's no shame in it. But thinking about it. And so I was able to give him this feedback using the words that he also understood. And I would say, listen, you remember how we did the social style? You know how you're expressive? And this is one of the things that you enjoy? Well, I don't. And so it was received well, and he stopped. So it's conflict resolution workshops for your teams. Yes. All right. Let's see. So the third one is, so as Agile coaches, right? Like we go in and we need to make sure that we're credible. So we need to make sure that, people have enough respect and they honor our expertise. So this is something also that we proactively can make sure that they know about us, because otherwise this whole assumption, right? Like, well, they should know that I know this. Like, they should know that I'm a good Agile coach. Like, no, like it's up to us. But say you kind of went kind of past that, and it could be used during the beginning of the engagement, or it could be if you see the misalignment. And again, it's like you have to be invited to be in the lane to do this. But this is a very effective workshop. I just realized it has like a different font, number 4 for whatever reason. Why are we embarking on a digital transformation? Like, what's our main drivers? You know, what will success look like? And that is the one, actually, when you start a new job, I found, I forget who I stole it from, but I absolutely love it and I use it a lot. And the question that I ask always at a new engagement, and because I have been doing consulting and like at some point I had done like 3 months, 6 months, 3 months, 9 months. Like, so like I got a chance to do that often. And I would say to the client, to whoever hiring manager, I would say, for you to say that this was a successful engagement, what would have to happen? Like, what are the outcomes are you looking for if we were to have this conversation 3 months from now? And it creates that alignment between their expectations and what is it that you're supposed to do. And especially if you track that, and if you have the outcomes, and you proactively show how what you're doing actually is aligned with the outcomes that were listed at the very beginning and agreed upon, that kind of helps with the frustration. But in this case, it's like it's related to the defining what the digital transformation is. It's closely related to change management as well. And if you think about people resisting, and that guy that was in my workshop with, you know, it doesn't work. Like, what is it? Like, what is it that doesn't work? What is it that you're afraid of? And so if we're defining it, and so this is actually done with the executive team, so that there's alignment among the executives, so they're not, you know, pulling in all the different directions. It's a hard one for them to agree. It makes it much easier if you come in and like a C-level executive hired you, or at least a VP, then maybe VP can persuade to do this exercise with their peers, or at least like if it's a business unit, that VP would maybe be okay to do this with the directors under them. So it's a good one. Define some of the major areas of change and high-level goals for each, right? Like proactively define it. And then you zero in into each high-level goal, and how will we measure its progress? Like, what are the KPIs? That's like identifying some of the things that you're gonna align on. And then it also helps with data-driven decision-making, right? So when we talk about conflict and we talk about social styles, okay, it's not that you can like, oh, let's do this, oh, let's do that. No, whether you're very analytical or you're amiable and you don't really, like, you love the data when someone else puts it together, but like you don't live in Excel spreadsheets, you hate that. Regardless, we're aligned that whatever decisions we make have to be based on certain data that you decided, certain metrics that you decided that you're going to use and measure. So it helps with conflict resolution as well. What are the main risk factors to the transformation, and how can we mitigate them? Because often, like, the whole like status quo, when say people agree and you start doing something, and then it's like, oh no, but not this, but not this. So if we can identify all those risks in advance, and we can say, okay, this risk is mitigated, this risk is still open, at least it's out there, and there's awareness, and everyone knows that those risks are still open. And so it also reduces stress where the expectations may not be aligned otherwise, and then you're expected to help with certain things, but it's like not feasible to get it done, and so now it's causing you stress and many others. So identifying risks as well. And I am very well aware that very often we come in as an agile coach and we're not in the position to do any of it. I'm very well aware I am often in that situation as well. But it's good to have that as a tool, right? Okay, let me maybe pause for just a few minutes before we go on, because we have 3 more of this. in case people have questions.
One question on the last one, it's sort of, I've heard the word digital and I've heard the word transformation, but I haven't quite heard the words digital transformation. So what is it?
Okay, that's actually a very good question. So I'm gonna give the floor to anybody who wants to attempt. What's a digital transformation? And how is it different from agile transformation? I should have probably defined it actually at the beginning. Thank you.
I can take a stab.
Sure.
It's transforming the technology that's enabling the business to achieve its results.
Yeah, broadly, it could be taking, maybe some business like insurance that's got 50-year-old processes that are very paper bound, putting them online, right? Something along those lines. That would be a very, very high level example.
And it was interesting. So I, at some point, like a few years ago, so to me, like I was very familiar with agile transformation. And then I kind of embarked on the concept of digital transformation. And I remember questioning, like, can digital transformation be done in a waterfall way, like without agile way of working? What are your thoughts about that? Just in general, anyone has thoughts?
Well, a lot of digital products were put together by waterfall processes, at least until the start of the 21st century. They all were. So by definition, you can do that.
Any other thoughts? So the short answer is you can, but man, it is so much easier actually doing it with the agile way of thinking and working and breaking it down into smaller chunks. In fact, like when we go in, like as Apex consultants, when we're hired, because sometimes I'm an agile coach on the ground, but sometimes I'm part of a team of a larger digital transformation. And when we go in, we actually break down digital transformations exactly like we do with the product. Like we have initiatives, we have epics, we break it down into user stories, we even estimate it in story points, and we even put it in Jira, and we track it exactly the same way. And it just makes it so much easier, just in general. 1 second. Okay.
And vice versa, can you, like that insurance company that Kurt mentioned, can one do an agile transformation there without necessarily digitizing everything, but just do things in a more agile way, but it's still paper and pencil and so on. It's just done in teams and flexibility. Can one do it that way, that
I'm gonna
direction?
say yes, David. I occasionally get sass from my 17-year-old saying, "Mom, you're scrum mastering us again." And 9 times out of 10, they're right.
So if you think about what you just said, so think about the outcomes, right? So if you want to do something very quickly, right? You want to do something quickly and you want to get feedback on quickly and you want to pivot if you need to. If you can do that with a piece of paper and pencil, then yes.
Mhm.
But if you can't, then you might want to revisit, right? Like, Kurt,
Yeah,
you want to say something? I can see it in your eyes.
yeah. Fixing a process like that, the picture I painted of a 50-year-old process, lots of pencils, papers, telephone, right? You might, making that more efficient, make it more into the lean stuff, right? The waste, and all that, elimination of waste and under all, the green belt, black belt stuff, right?
Mhm.
And That might be more than that, than quote unquote agile or scrum. But of course, as we're well aware, lean is the grandfather of agile. So maybe agile is maybe a little advanced for something like that, but certainly there are ways to improve it with methodologies like lean, in my opinion.
So there's a good example. We only have 8 minutes. I actually have a ton more to show. Well, not a ton more, but more than 8 minutes worth. But I was at Cengage learning, and if you think about the content, like the content that is served on a certain platform, right? Think about LMS, think about like articles and things like that, that now you have to digitize, and you have to make sure that it's like accessible easily and you can search for it. And I remember like one example, someone who was in that space for 30 years, and we were going through the transformation, and they were discussing like different things that you have to pay attention to. Like if it was in print and it was a graphic, and there was like, you better be sure that there's no errors in there because it goes to print. And if it's digital, you focus more on it being easily found rather than it being perfect quality, because you can easily update the quality. And I remember this woman like sharing how they had gone through all kinds of different improvements and digitizing the content, and they did it in waterfall. And I remember for me, that was like a very aha moment. And she could compare both, and she did love the agile way of working eventually, like she embraced it. And she was my kind of helper in persuading others who had been doing something in the same way for 30 years, because she could relate to them a lot more. But I remember for me, that was like this big aha moment, because it wouldn't even like cross my mind. But it's possible, I guess, right? Like, okay. So there's change management workshop. Again, a lot of questions. Feel free to copy paste, and I'll upload the PDFs. The biggest supporters, how can we leverage them? There's a lot of like leveraging when it comes to change management, and seeing who can be a champion and who can you use, who can relate to the folks that are more likely to resist. Communication. All right. And this is the workshop to define objectives and KPIs. And this particular section is on measuring what matters, right? And there's a book that's called Measuring What Matters. And it's all about objectives and KPIs and metrics across the organization. So it's a good one to look in, because that also actually causes a lot of stress often if things are not defined and you don't have the objectives and you don't have the KPIs, and it just kind of, or say they're not aligned across the organization. So some teams are measuring one thing, some teams are measuring the other, stuff like that. It can actually cause a lot of frustration to a C-level executive as well. So if you think about it, like if they have no visibility into what's happening and they can't tell what's what, but they have to answer also. So I've seen stress level on different levels, right? So, and I'm extremely like empathetic to everyone. Like it's not just like leaders not being aligned. It kind of goes both ways as well. They're having their pain points as well. And so defining working agreement, decision making, ownership. This is all about accountability. That's kind of the general topic here. And then this is the value definition workshop, where you talk about who your customers are, you talk about how you maximize the value of your product, your service, and your role. Like as a leader, what does it mean for you to be the best leader you can be? As an agile coach, as a product owner. So some of very good questions to ask as well. And some of these questions could really just be your self-reflection, but some of it could be like a real workshop with folks. But the main lesson learned, which I already gave the spoiler alert, all we can do as change agents is invite, encourage, attempt to engage. None of us have magic wands. And so if someone has no interest to engage with you, eventually you do have to recognize you've done all you can and move on. And as much as, you know, over the years, many of us thought like that that's not an option, it actually is. Because we can control what may come our way. However, we cannot control what may come our way, but we can control the choices we make and the actions we take. And let's see, I got 3 more minutes. So the question for you is, what will you do tomorrow to chill? Hopefully you got some moves. You can do some dancing, because that releases stress. I don't know, at least for me. And if you want to learn more, there's some contact information. I have a site. And if you want to talk to me, I have a Calendly. And I will pause here and I will upload those PDFs. And if you have any questions, I guess now is the time.